Good morning. It's September 3rd, 2010, and we're here with representatives of the Nason-Aronica family who were inducted last night into the Ellensburg Rodeo Hall of Fame. Gentlemen, for the record, if you'd state your name, place of birth, and date of birth for us.
My name's Nason-Aronica, and I was born in Ellensburg, Washington, May 19th, 1947.
I'm Arnold Joseph Cleveland. I was born in Ellensburg, Washington, March 25th, 1939.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood and your families.
Well, my mother was Ida Nason, and Arnold's my nephew. My oldest sister, Helen, who was the rodeo queen 1929. This is her oldest son. And basically, like, I was born and raised on the ranch, our allotments, and still there today. I participated in a rodeo from the time Mom brought us down here. We always had teepees in the regular Indian village. At that time, it wasn't contracted. The village was a lot larger than what it is today. It covered the whole, pretty much the whole fairground, starting from back behind the chutes where the village is at over there. What do they call it?
The Frontier Village?
Yeah, Frontier Village.
Okay.
The teepees used to start there at the Frontier Village and go clear around and clear over by where the swimming pool and stuff was at. And about 1959-60, they started going to contract. I think it was 1960 they started contracting and limit the number of teepees and stuff that was coming in. That changed how many participants there were.
So that was part of the contract. We only have so much room.
Yeah, now they only did that. They just wanted to limit the number. Before it was what they called an open village, and so it didn't cost the rodeo board and all that money for the teepees and stuff, but they took up a big area and it was just open, and your various tribes from all over showed up and set a teepee up because it was just an open village. And then they had their powwows and stick games and stuff like that, but they kind of changed that due to space and some other things were changing then.
Sure, as they do.
Yeah.
How about you, Arnold? What are some of the things that you remember about the Ellensburg Rodeo as a youngster?
Well, I can remember, I guess must have been really young coming down here. We always seated on one side there, but we used, they had the old relay races and stagecoach races, and some of the Indians had the what they call that, scramble. And my dad was he was a former jockey that rode around the Northwest, and one of my uncles up north from the Omak area had a stable of race horses that they toured around with. But I pretty much spent my real young days with Ida, my grandmother, at the ranch there in the Nanum, and attended school off and on here in Ellensburg. My parents migrated into California during I think 1939. My dad went down, and by 1940 we went to California for work purposes, and ended up in working in the fruit industry. But every year in the fall we'd end up back up here for the apple season, and then we'd usually spend a winter either out here at the ranch or in Chelan area, Omak area, Brewster, where my dad's home place was. Okay. And he's Mose Cleveland from the Okanagan area. So I think looking forward every year to the rodeo was quite an event for all of us. And today, looking back, just driving in, I was telling my friend that you think back over the years when we were young, you still had to get up and do the chores, milk the cows, which we had. Grandma had several cows and animals that we had to take care of, but then you get all that done and get back down here and spend the day and the evening, and then go back and milk the cows, do the same chores. I think these days have changed a little bit. modern technology moved in and
Go to
milking
Safeway to get them
machines.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Then
So-
try the rodeo.
but I spend a lot of time with my grandmother Ida off and on through the year, especially in the high school years. I ended up just staying here with her and kind of graduated. I never really got out of high school, but I got adopted by the class of '58. So
Okay.
it's been kind of historical. Every year we seem to get back here for the Labor Day weekend rodeo, and even though I spent a lot of years in California working down there, we always manage to spend the Labor Day weekends up here.
That's a family tradition.
Mhm.
Yeah, with the mom and them, it was a big deal for her because it was the one time that she got to see a lot of the family members before the winter set in, and a lot of them came from the coast and up Okanagan, Omak, Canada. They all come down for Labor Day, and she'd get to see them, and they knew this was going to be the last kind of the rodeo up in this area where everybody get together.
Okay.
And before they kind of had the rodeo grounds, they used to get together at home ranch and over around Cook Creek where Grandma lived, and so it was always a pleasure to come down for rodeo. It meant a lot to her. Well, and the fact that this is where her grandmother lived and it was home to them.
Yeah. For the folks listening to this interview, the actual physical spot of the Ellensburg rodeo was her
the physical
home,
spot
not
was
just the Kittitas
Yeah,
Valley.
yeah.
Your family's place was
And
here.
what a lot of people didn't realize, I guess, our family was, originally my mother was a Wenatchee-Pum, and she was on the reservation there in Leavenworth, and when they did away with that reservation at Leavenworth there where the forks of the Icicle and Wenatchee River come together, at that point in time they split our family, and like her brother, Ed Walsh, or Edward Joseph was his name, they took him to the mission in Omak, and that's where we got the name change. It's also where we wound up with the Cleveland name, because what they did is they put names in the hat and drew names of presidents, and our family wound up with the Cleveland name, and that's how come we say we're the original Cleveland Indians. And
Those guys that played baseball.
and my mom's brother, his name, they ran out of president's name, and they put, I don't know, some VIP name or something to do. His name was Walsh, and that's who my uncle, he drew that name Walsh, and I'm not sure exactly what claim to fame that guy had, but that's who we wound up with here, my mom's brother. And my mother was brought down to the Kittitas Valley because she had an aunt and them down here, and grandma was brought this way. So that's how come they wound up in the Kittitas Valley.
And when you say brought, the Indian Agency.
Yeah, when they
down,
made that
or-
move and stuff, some people said they had a choice, but Mom said they never had a choice on where they went. They just told them, okay, you're going this way, you're coming this way, and that's kind of how they wound up in the Kittitas Valley.
Oh, you know.
And of course, while Mom was here taking care of her aunt, she met Johnny Nason, and they got married, and she married into the Nason family.
Okay.
And she wound up with the home place because she took care of the old lady Nason and them, and they turned around, and when they passed away, they gave the ranch to my mother as opposed to giving it to their children. So Mom wound up with the ranch. That's how it wound up in our family.
Okay. Okay.
I think another interesting line there is the Wenatchee band, part of the Kittitas band that we're all related to, sitting on a line, so to speak, with the Bureau. So part of the family members are enrolled in the Yakima Nation, and part of the family is enrolled in the Colville Nation. So we have a split, family ties. We're very closely related.
Well,
But-
you're one people.
Yeah,
I mean,
we are one,
yeah.
but we're enrolled in different, tribes, so to speak.
That's a bureaucratic deal.
Yeah.
And over years, it's caused conflict within the family, you might say, just because not so much our own family members, but the conflict between the Yakima Nation and the Colville Nation, because the politics involved in, okay, one's a treaty tribe, one was a, I forget the term, and so you have this conflict going on. But at that point in time, what people have to realize is in history was this, you know, that's how they wanted to do is conquer, divide the Indians, and I think that's the reason why they split these families. Part of the strategy was moving those families, and also at that time, they made it so we could not speak our own language. They was trying to assimilate the people, and like my mother was saying, they wouldn't let them at the mission. My uncle and them, they couldn't speak the Indian language. They were supposed to try and learn the English language or whatnot. And Arnold was at the mission for a while, but he left the mission and came down to the ranch.
Remind us where the mission was.
Omak was where the mission was.
At St. Mary's Mission
St. Mary's
there.
Mission in Omak.
Catholic boarding school located about 12 miles southeast of Omak,
Okay.
up near the Omak Lake. And it was a Catholic boarding school established by the Jesuit order, and I'm not sure when the dates were, but a lot of the natives the youngsters ended up there going to school there through the 8th or 9th grade. When I finished there, the 9th grade was the final grade there. Then we had to go and enter a public school system, which I came back here to Ellensburg for the high school years. So
You talk about your family coming back to the Ellensburg Rodeo and being kind of a family reunion. Not only your immediate family, but your extended family. And my understanding of the Kittitas Valley is traditionally that was part of its role. I mean, people gathered here in the spring and the fall, didn't they? And
this was a gathering place.
That's
they
right.
had, you know, and my grandmother's allotments, she had an allotment that was located over in Cook Creek. And
when you say allotment, Alan, tell us what
an allotment is. Back when what they did before they opened up, it was under that Homestead Act where they determined that they was going to give every enrolled Indian 160 acres.
So this was in addition to if a Homestead Act, any citizen could go.
Well, what they didn't realize under the Homestead is what settlers were starting to move in and whatnot. The settlers were wanting land and whatnot. So what they had to do was they went and took a census and they determined they have X number of Indians there, and so for every enrolled Indian they gave them 160 acres of land, and then they gave them so much more land that was to for their future generations, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and stuff like this. And then
so this was an amendment to the 1855 treaty?
Okay. So that's what they wound up doing is after they gave every Indian their 160 acre allotment, they said, okay, all this other land is excess land, and so we'll open that up to the homesteaders. And that's how a lot of the Indians, like in the Kittitas Valley, we lost all our allotments, because what they did is they didn't realize when the homesteaders came in to get that unclaimed land that was supposed to be open, they didn't know where the Indians were living. And because the Indians were travelers, like here in the spring, all of the people from the Kittitas Valley, usually early spring, were down on the Columbia River at Celilo Falls fishing for their first fish this season, because if it was a long winter, they were probably out of food.
Sure. And
so they were down on the river getting their
so
summer.
A settler comes in and says,
and
well,
so
there's nobody occupying this ground.
What happened is you had this piece of ground that was allotment, but nobody's there. Their teepee poles might have been in a tree somewhere or whatnot, but they just claimed it. And so when the Indians came back, there's a log house there, or somebody was sitting there and claimed it as their homestead. And like Mom said, well, the Indians thought there was a lot of land at that time. They just moved over the hill and set their teepee up somewhere else and didn't think too much about it.
Sure.
And that's how they wound up getting moved out. I think the only reason we have our original allotments is because there was two old ladies that were blind, and Mom took care of them, and somebody always had to stay back with them. So there was always somebody located at our allotments, so that when the people, the settlers moved in and stuff, there was always somebody there, so they couldn't actually establish.
Misfortune of those
Yeah,
two
they could not-
ladies actually was a benefit to your
Yeah,
family. in
but
terms
they
of
always
getting
had to
the
leave
people.
somebody back, and I think that's, and it's just, and like I said, and as it turned out, for a long time, the only allotments in the Kittitas Valley belonged to our family. And then when my grandmother and grandfather passed away, we lost grandma's allotments in the Cook Creek area through probate and tribal politics, and we don't know how we did, or how it happened, but we did lose it.
So, to your knowledge, are there any other allotments? in the
No,
valley?
pretty much any other, I mean, the existing allotments that are here belong to our family,
Okay.
because all the other allotments were disposed of.
If I'm gonna go over a map with you someday. and see
Yeah,
where
it's
that
just,
is.
you know, a lot of a lot of the Kittitas Indians were settled up in the Thorpe area, and all that ground up there has been taken out of trust and into.
No, I envisioned a fair number of them down in the mouth of the canyon. Was that
Well,
accurate
there
or
was
not?
some in there. There was in there, like Mom's aunt lived on the river bottom. We still have well, actually, we had 160 over there, and over sometime we lost 80 of that. Part of that was due to the river went through it, split the allotment in half. So part of it's on the west side of the river, the other part's on the east side, and a big portion of it went right down the middle of the river
Sure.
as it washed out.
Sure.
So
Where in the Thorpe area was
the Thorpe is stuff on that, out past the fire station there, as you going, they got that little fire station in there and on that flat, I'm not sure, I forget what they call that little area in there. That's where they were located at. Across from Hutchison's on the south side of the river, and they were camped in there. And I believe there's a photo of some of the teepees that were out there in one of the historical photos. I forget who. I've seen the picture. I know where the area's at, but that's where they were located at.
It was interesting because just earlier, Alan and I were talking about the allotment here, which was 160 acres
the one
also.
at the rodeo
Yeah.
grounds?
Yeah, so we're trying to imagine,
Where the boundaries
Where
were,
the
actual
lines
corner
were
points
on that,
were,
so.
and how big of an area it took. 160 is.
Does the Bureau have those records, or
That's
somebody
part of
in
the-
county?
that's-
I wonder. Or?
That's one of the things that the lost, Nip, how they managed to get great grandma, because I remember Mom always telling me great grandma never wanted to move, but then they met with the tribal leaders, and through tribal thing there was an agreement. They moved her from here and they moved her over to Water Street, and shortly after they moved her there, great grandma passed away because she was getting up in years. And part of that agreement for giving up the grounds and whatnot is that our family would always participate in the rodeo. We'd have free entry into the rodeo. We'd have access. And of course, now that's been, with this change of rodeo, some of that has been in question. And they've asked us to show, where's the paper and document. Well, like so much of our stuff, we can't find that document. We've looked at archives and whoever was sitting there. I don't even know who the leaders were at that time, to try and find out who was in tribal council and who made those agreements.
So there was an actual negotiation. That was one question I
Yeah.
had for you when your family left the physical side of the Ellensburg Rodeo.
Yeah.
Under what conditions were they? They agreed, or
Well, the
were
conditions
they
was
displaced, or you?
basically they were displaced. And the agreement that they told the old lady and supposedly promised to her is that her children and great grandchildren and children would perpetuity would be able to participate in the Ellensburg Rodeo. And just like at that time, mom always told me that we was promised these things. The Kittitas band was promised these things on part of that land that their kids could go to school, have free education, and we was always promised education. It never happened. And at that time, Central Washington University was actually the land grant college. So technically, our family and members was supposed to be able to attend this college and get a higher education and whatnot. Of course, they moved that land grant college to Pullman, I believe, and Central is no longer land grant college. I am only aware of one Yakima that's actually went through Central and didn't have to pay pay the tuition and stuff, and he fought it and it raised a deal, but they didn't want to open that can of worms, I believe.
Probably not. No.
So, but like the actual Kittitas members and stuff, our mom was always saying, yeah, they told us our kids could go get educated, and it don't happen.
Well, and that was obviously the language barrier itself was a challenge there. If you're making a deal and the deal's in written in language you don't understand, then
documentation was
the thing
difficult.
is the one thing we found out with our culture and stuff is, everything is written down and recorded somewhere, and it was supposed to be on paper. Our tradition was as an oral language,
sure.
but it seems like that all those written pieces of paper have gotten lost over the years or archived. The one thing most people don't understand is like the Yakimas and stuff through the BIA, they usually took the records of the local Indians and moved them. Like, if you go to our tribal office, you won't find a lot of our records, because a lot of the records for the Yakimas are housed in Washington, D.C., and if you go down there, you'll find records for the Oklahoma Indians housed here. And that was all part of that. At that time, the Indian policy and stuff was, they knew that the Indians couldn't travel those long distances to look for those papers, and it's just hard to track stuff down.
Sure.
And I only found that out when I was trying to do research for water rights and stuff like this. I started finding out, and there's archives in our main office is Portland. So you got archives in the Portland area office, you got archives in Seattle, and a lot of them are archived in Washington, D.C.
Huh.
And so knowing what you're looking for a piece of paper, if it's there, it's pretty hard to find.
Yeah, even if the documentation is there, tracking it down. So
Trying to track it down.
challenge, sure.
And like our home place, our original allotments now, our family has never moved, but part of that was taken out of trust due to the fact that Charlie Nason actually has a recorded homestead, and under the Homestead Act, after so many years, that homestead allotment came out of what they call trust, and that's how they established taxes on that land for the white settlers. Well, what they failed to realize under that Homestead Act is there was also what they called an Indian homestead act deal, where if they recorded Indian in there, they were supposed to be exempt from taxes, and most of the Indians didn't understand, and whoever was doing the filing for them just checked homestead instead of Indian homestead. Or like in Charlie's case, when they moved him from Leavenworth down here, they made an agreement with those Wenatchee Indians that land, it was like they were getting it was be like a homestead, but they were supposed to be given the deed to the property, like it was deeded to them, but it was Indian, but they would be non-exempt from taxes, and that isn't what happened. And because of that, portion of our allotments, even though we don't know how it was taken out of trust, and so we're paying taxes on that portion now.
Is there some of the allotment that is still exempt down? Or
Yes,
personal
there's about half.
Okay.
About half of it's exempt.
And that's as a result of having the correct filing status.
Yeah, because
or
it's
whatever.
still considered trust.
Okay. And that's how the county deals with it. On
Yeah,
their rules.
right.
Huh?
And once again, the county is saying, okay, if you can find the documentation and stuff, we'll every year.
The proof's yours.
Every year when we pay taxes, I file under protest, and you have to do that, so that if you do find that documentation, then you can come back, and supposedly they'll pay you the back stuff. But
Are you still spending some energy and time looking, or?
oh yeah, you're always looking. There's a lot of stuff, over time you just look, and maybe you'll eventually find it. And hopefully you
At this
try
point,
to,
it's probably more of interest to you,
or you just think about how times are changing. Like my kids now, I wonder, how far down it's gonna go if my kids don't marry back into the Indian people. That could be the end of the line there. They are enrolled, but I don't know where it's gonna go after that,
Sure.
And I
That's
think
public policy too.
that's where I think our Indian, all of our Indian tribes are faced with this enrollment. We've intermarried so much now, And I think we're slowly getting to that point where assimilation will happen if we're not careful.
Just through.
And part of that is due, like I said, loss of language.
Sure.
We've lost that part of the culture. Now it's hard to get our young kids interested in our culture because it's too boring because of the new technology, I think.
Well, and history is not a young person's sport.
No.
I mean,
No.
that's for sure. But some of our interview questions revolve around rodeo participation and contestants in particular. Did both of you fellas ride in the races, or obviously many of your family members did? Did either one of you?
I started when I was pretty young at the mission school there in Omak. A lot of my cousins were starting out rodeoing, you know, broncs and some of the bulls up there we did, but down here I never participated. I got into high school and I decided that wasn't a career to pursue. Football for the team was enough, you know, physical impacts but I remember, you know, Uncle, his older brother, Junior, used to rope here off of one of the horses and did some bulldogging and like I say, my dad and them used to do the relay races early on. And
yeah, growing up, that was something that I remember is the races. I mean,
yeah.
There used to be a lot more races, and there was a lot of what they call the war bonnet race and flat race and all that stuff. And once again, over time, due to insurance and all this stuff, these races have been cut. Like in the last couple of years, we've cut, I think it's been about 5 years now, we cut all races out due to insurance. The rodeo changed there, and they shortened they made the track smaller. I personally didn't rodeo much as far as riding. I mean, other than just local farmers, we always helped out and rodeoed around there. And I found out, like Arnold said, that I couldn't handle the pain. I didn't like getting busted up, and I was pretty small. I was actually really small, didn't weigh much. I always wanted to rope, but I found out that the calves were so much bigger I couldn't reach around over the top without riding them with my belly. So I wasn't much of a roper, but I did powwow. I followed the powwow circuit for a while and danced. I danced in arenas. I got the opportunity to represent the Ellensburg Rodeo at both the Seattle World's Fair and the Spokane World's Fair when it was in Spokane, and danced and performed in those places for representing the Ellensburg Rodeo. And so it's always been my goal to try and carry on that tradition of family participation, and in my mind, the Ellensburg Rodeo has always been one of the biggest rodeos. I've always felt that it was put on properly. It was a good rodeo and whatnot. And of course,
yeah, we have that sense because we've known it, and I can say as a
grew up
person
with it.
that grew up watching the Ellensburg Rodeo, and then later went and competed at rodeos around the country.
Well, I remember early on around here, like in high school, before I went in the military, just every weekend you could find a little rodeo here. The miners up here, you know, up the creek there, and in different weekend or different places each weekend.
They have rodeo events around the valley.
right in their home, on the ranches. And
actually, if you go back, they used to hold a rodeo every Sunday at our ranch.
Yeah.
And everybody came up there. And like, Mike was talking last night, Mike Allen was talking about the northeast corner of the county kind of, and the different family name roads, but the northeast corner was mostly made up of cowboys, and it was cattle people and horse people and stuff, whereas some of the other parts of the valley was they started into actually farming, and once they put the canals in, those people went into farming, and the northeast corner was pretty dry and rocky, and it was mostly cattle country, and so they was always having some kind of rodeo because that's how they worked their cattle. They actually worked it, and so my brothers and them were always roping, or we was branding, or cutting calves, or working cows. And
rodeo in the purest sense
and
of
it was
the word.
a pure sense it was a working rodeo. And we had what we called our picnic grounds. They had rodeos up there every Sunday, and picnics and stuff held up there, and people would come from all over up there to just do that on a Sunday or a Saturday, Sunday. They also had services there. The one thing about the Kittitas and the Wanapum band, they were considered very religious people. And they held the Kittitas Valley was a valley known for no fighting or anything. There was people gathered here, and there was no animosity between them. They left it behind them when they came into the valley. It was what they called sacred ground, and so there was always kind of peace. And whether they came here, they came here to exchange food, trade for. My mom and them, we did a lot of hunting and stuff over on the side. Mom said they'd trade deer meat and hides and stuff for baskets with the Snoqualmies and stuff like that, and that's how they traded back and forth.
That was the economy of the region.
That was the economy of the region. So that's kind of some of the history of our family, like the Nason family. They started up in Icicle River area, Leavenworth area. They used to always run horses, and Gene Eckert told me the story that he seen the largest wild horses that was rounded up. There's a recorded history of it where there was over 3,500 wild horses brought into the valley, and it was the Nason family and them that rounded up most of those, and they brought the horses in here, and all those horses went to Russia. The Russian Tsar was here, and 3,500 head of wild horses went to Russia. And there's documentations and pictures of that through the state archives, where the Russian Tsar was actually.
Now, was the Nason family compensated for that, or
I don't know whether
that worked?
I don't know how that worked. I think they sold the horses. I think they were. I mean, I don't know, money wise. I don't know what traded hands there or how it went. I just heard the story through Gene Eckert, who was a young boy, and at that time
Gene, Tim, and Tom's father.
Right.
Okay.
And the horses were brought up into the Snebley farm. That's where they corralled them at and caught them. And the Nasons always used to be the ones that would catch all these wild horses, catch them, and they actually dropped horses off at our ranch. They bring them into the Kittitas Valley, and they took them all the way to the Dalles. They dropped horses off at the ranch in Nananum, horses at our allotment in River Bottom Road, up over the hill down into Yakima, and then clear down to the Dalles. And then people that was traveling back and forth, they'd stop at those locations and leave a horse that they was riding from, like the Dalles and Topnish or Topnish, when they come into the valley.
Get a fresh one here.
Get a fresh one and ride the next 25 or 30 miles and stop and trade them. And they'd go back and forth all the way up to Wenatchee.
Now, would you retain possession of that horse, or was it just communal in a sense that
somehow,
left one, you can take one? Or?
Somehow our family, you left a horse and then you take a fresh horse, and then somehow in the fall they'd round them all up, and the Nasons would winter them up there in their allotments up around Wenatchee, Cashmere, Leavenworth area.
Okay.
And that was the stories that were told. Mom told me.
Gentlemen, what parting words can you give us about the Ellensburg Rodeo and your family's interest and participation and contribution?
Well, I think the like I say, over the years, it's been a big part of our family. And again, the same thing Alan was mentioning earlier, to come back together and meet family members that we don't normally see through the working year, and hopefully it'll continue on down. We're having a big family gathering here at the ranch this weekend also, and I think it was interesting because we were looking at some numbers, physical numbers on descendants from Ida and Helen and Minnie. Just from Minnie and Helen, the two Nason girls married the two Cleveland brothers from up north, and right at this point we counted over 200 descendants from those two, those two marriages.
Yeah.
We had over 200 enrolled members in the Colville Nation. We never did count what's part of that family is recorded down into, enrolled in the Yakima Nation. So that was an interesting
Gosh, yeah.
point, you know, to think that in the past, what's it been, 29, whatever, however many years, 80 years, you know, the tree has gone down to
Over 200.
yeah.
One branch.
yeah. So it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be a part of your induction and all of that, you know. So
Alan, how about?
It's an honor to be a part of the induction. I look at like I said, his mom always said change, and change is evident. I see the rodeos all around are changing, the struggle in rodeos. I just hope that the Ellensburg rodeo can continue. The change I see happening with the Ellensburg rodeo is some people don't think that the history portion of the Indian involvement is that critical to the rodeo, and so that there is a few people out there that would like to phase that out and not continue to do that.
It's great. You got by them.
Those posters are sticky. Anyway, the change I see happen, I just hope the Ellensburg Rodeo can overcome it. The one thing that being involved with the Ellensburg Rodeo and the politics still around it as far as Indians' participation and stuff, I really feel that the Ellensburg Rodeo Board and the Fair Board need to work together more, because I think in the future, if they don't, the political thing, it's going to really hurt both of them. I don't think one can work without the other, and unless they can work together closer and get more closer involved, that I can see it actually hindering the Ellensburg Rodeo.
Yeah, in the name of progress and trying to, whether it's improve their bottom line or their performance or entertainment value, what the Ellensburg Rodeo, it seems to me, and I hear you saying, Alan, one of their strongest assets is that relationship between fair and rodeo and the Indian participation and contribution that is unique. You know, that isn't a part of, it's a part of Pendleton, but it's not a part of the good rodeo at Fort Worth or Houston or Cheyenne. You know, I guess maybe a little more there, but it's.
Well, I think in the
what
rodeo
identifies us as a.
I think in the rodeo world, each rodeo has to have its own little unique thing to draw the crowd and identify itself with. And for the Ellensburg Rodeo, I believe it's always been the Kittitas band
coming down off the hill.
The Indians coming down off of the hill. We used to race off of that before the deal. It was similar to the suicide race, and that was stopped. The Omak Stampede has the suicide race, and that's what sets it apart from the Ellensburg Rodeo. I really, like I said, for the last few years, it seems like it's more of a struggle every year just to try and hang on to what little bit you've got. And sometimes it seems like we're going backwards instead of forward as far as the Indian participation and what they want.
Who's the current board member that's in charge?
The current board member is kind of Brent Hupert has actually been stepped in. Originally it was Mel Schindler, and he stepped down, and Brent kind of filled in for him this year, and he's also doing kind of a double duty, but he was trying to help us do negotiations. And Rex Bucks is actually the chief of the village, more or less. Run that. I've been the go-between between them and the tribe, trying to make the call, because I live here and can attend the meetings and stuff like that. But it's getting more difficult all the time to make that work. It seems like, because, like I said, in some times we go backwards instead of going farther back and forward. And like I said, as money gets tighter and as they try to juggle the funding and change the rodeo ground, we become less and less part of it.
Well, I don't think if there's going to be an Ellensburg rodeo that survives, that the Yakimas will never not be a part of it. Or I hope.
Well, you know, but there is some talk there. Part of it is I have reached the point, even myself, if we go back anymore, in order to put the program on, because everything because it does take money to do things now. If we keep going farther back, we reach a point where we have to make a decision too, can we really do it?
Yeah.
That's up to the Yakima Nation. I can't speak for the Yakima Nation, but I have suggested to them that maybe it's time that the Yakimas pull out. But I hate to pull that plug because that's also part of my family history.
Sure,
It's
yeah,
part
that'd
of,
be
and I'm not sure where my family, whether my nieces and nephews, if I leave, well, they'll participate. And going back to what Arnold had mentioned about the fact that our family split, we do have more of our family that's in the role of Colville than we do Yakima. I have two brothers that were down Yakima that had no children. So, and the one brother and sister that did, they had a smaller families than my sisters that were taking Colville.
so just sheer numbers.
So
and that's
sheer
people's-
numbers were smaller Yakima, so I don't know. And since they went to contracting and stuff right now, it's kind of the contract between the Ellensburg Rodeo and stuff is set up with the Yakima Nation. So unless they change that to allow other tribes or other deals in, you're not gonna get, as far as our family go, you might not get the participation if the rest of my family don't follow or take over. If something was to happen to me,
Yeah, what interest level?
yeah,
do
or
they
what
have?
interest level do they have?
Willingness to-
I think the problem gets compounded too in that the Colville Nation is a combination of 11 different tribes
Yeah.
that were all grouped into one area and said, okay, now you guys, all of you 11 tribes are a Colville Nation. And the same thing with the Yakima Nation. So you have tribal,
You have tribal politics
Yeah.
at play.
Yeah.
so we have, not only the Yakima Nation per se itself and the Colvilles, but then you have individual
Internal.
tribes internal too that, trying to work with that political arena is challenging at times.
But we hope it'll continue. I like to be positive and hope that the Ellensburg Rodeo go, because like I said, I've always felt the Ellensburg Rodeo has been a great rodeo. It's been, because early on, the people that was in the rodeo, they did it for the love of the rodeo and the love of that free spirit, you might say, and that's what Ellensburg Rodeo brings compared to other rodeos, was a little bit of that old west feeling.
Sure, yeah, the original intent.
Yeah, the original intent with.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. It's, you talk about it being an honor or privilege to be inducted into Ellensburg Rodeo Hall of Fame. It's our privilege, frankly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.